As we begin our look into the more alien races and cultures in Conan, please keep in mind that to qualify for this list, the race must be sentient and have some form of observable culture. Sources are listed below, and specification, though in a flawed way, has been given when theory crafting is present. I do tend to get carried away in these videos. Grimdark. Half off! We ended our last video speaking of Serpent Men, and that's a good place to start. The Serpent Men were both the grandchildren of and the original worshippers of the serpent god Set. Sligoth, the father of the Serpent Men, was a powerful demon born from the first murder, which may have included forced intercourse between Set and an unnamed elder god. Born over 1 million years ago in the pre-cataclysmic age, human mages and warriors did battle with these creatures seemingly endlessly. First, the Serpent Men would win and enslave humanity in an age of constant humiliation for man. However, eventually, the death of the grand majority of Serpent Men came in an event which some theorized to be a war and others theorized to be a great magic spell. Regardless, this spell, or possibly war, would be uncovered by a picked shaman, which reads, Ka Nama Ka Lajirama. Today, in the Hyborian Age, the remaining Serpent Men are more or less splinter cell groups, who are very open enemies to humanity in vast majority, while they often disguise themselves as humans. If a person knows the mesmerist spell, Ka Nama Ka Lajirama, the human caster will be able to force them to reveal their true form. In ancient times, this spell would also weaken them, which is why the slaves of Serpent Men were forbidden from saying it. Serpent Men tend to live in anywhere from volcanic to subterranean environments. Serpent Man culture is defined by a worship of the slaughter of humans and the downfall of Mitra, the most well-known human god of law. As this is the core enemy of their ancestor god Set, as evidenced by the outlawing of Ibis, Mitra's Stygian form, when Set worship became the primary religion of said country under High Priest Thoth Amon. Serpent Men seemingly came into being around the same time the first human tribes were coming into their own in terms of smaller civilizations, as well, and they have been gridlocked in a race war forever, defining much of each other's cultures. Whereas we view the Serpent Men as chaotic deceivers, serial killers, and predators of humans, they view man as oppressive, sadistic, kill-crazy imperialists. While Serpent Man culture has been heavily diluted over the centuries, every Serpent Man is taught upon birth that humanity's continued existence means the slavery and genocide of their race. Other than smaller Serpent Man cults, which can be found all over the Hyborian Age map, there are two known places of high Serpent Man culture. The first are the Nagas, which is not their true name. In fact, they may not even exist anymore. They are just related to the Nagas of myth, so that's what we're calling them. But this was a peaceful, isolationist Serpent Man cult encountered by Kull of Atlantis during the pre-cataclysmic age. This is where we get an idea of Serpent Men's social view towards humanity, as I explained earlier. Obviously, the only reason this group is peaceful is that they purposely stay away from humanity. This peacetime has made their culture highly introspective and philosophical, provided the extreme rarity of encountering them. They would be more likely to treat you as an untouchable freak in their underground civilization instead of killing you outright. So again, because this was underground right now, the sinking of Atlantis has occurred in the Hyborian Age. We know that that's gone. However, on the rare chance, in the very odd, weird, interdimensional chance you do encounter this civilization or this civilization found a way to survive, similar to a specific Velusian-cultured Deep One civilization that we will get into when we get into our Deep Ones video, then it is possible for you to encounter them, and it would be possible for you to have, say, in a roleplay sense, an origin story for a character that studied like a little bit of Serpent Man culture, or maybe was a slave in this area and saw the horrors of Serpent Men, whatever it was. It would just be fun to include. The last place is very important as it highlights both the physiological advantages of the Serpent Men and is an example of their high culture that can be more than explored in Conan Exiles. Located inside of a volcano and only accessible through passing through a dungeon known as the Well of Skelos, there is no way a human could have crafted this city. Made primarily of obsidian with bioluminescent mystic highlights that may be a mixture of jade and having a combination of Indian, Arabian, and Egyptian aesthetics, we see an architectural style only truly appreciated when one understands the cold-blooded nature of this species. One can find lava pits without any signs of remains, like bonfires, throughout the city, showing us that this extra heat provides a positive feeling of comfort even in the heat of a volcano for the half-demon species. In addition to this, unique to to the architecture of the Serpent Men are accents in a slithering tail formation jutting out from their structures, many of which are of course in veneration to either their own ancestors or Set. When one looks at the number of statues to one's ancestors found in the Serpent Man city in that volcano, we see that a kind of religious structure can be derived, where most likely the second most holy figure would be their father Sligeth. Under him would be the various Serpent Man ancestors who honored their people and fought for their people's supremacy and well-being, and then above Sligeth would be Set himself, the grandfather originator of the Serpent Man. In line with the religious parts of their culture that would later be hand down to the Stygians, their rulers are most commonly Tempests of Set. While northern Turan meets eastern Hyperborea in the Exiled Lands, we find this volcanic city of the Serpent Men to be most likely divided into the following castes. Tempests on top, as High Priest is more a Stygian term that actually applied to the worship of Ibis until Thoth Amon's takeover, but Tempest seems to specifically apply to Set worship, as well as imbuing the Tempest with Set-specific abilities, including the very specific shapeshifting into a giant snake. Under these people, you would have powerful mages who are not Tempests for whatever reason, like the Guardian of the City, Skelos the Degenerate. Under them would be the warrior class, who would of course be valued for their efforts in the ever-long war with the imperialist human devils. And under them would be a servant or serf class, who are not seemingly poorly treated, but clearly act in a servile way, not having any power whatsoever. While it's not clear whether this is willful devotion or genuine slavery, one can observe a correlation with physiology. The colors of Serpent Men you find in Conan Exiles are usually green, brown, or white. The albino white Serpent Men are usually unnaturally taller and almost always are depicted in leadership positions of some kind, denoting most likely a noble heritage inherent to the physical trait. Despite subracial or blood caste differences that may have existed otherwise, the endangered nature fused with the supremacist outlook of the race most likely influences their treatment of slaves to be more humane. If they truly wish to outfight their oldest enemies, known as man, then they are going to need all the numbers they can get. One of the reasons I couldn't do this video as a narrative in-character performance is that sometimes when it comes to Robert E. Howard's writing, you really do have to take a step back and respect his understanding of the human condition. Serpent Men were his famously favorite non-human enemies to use, and the part of our evolutionary history as a species being played on here is quite obvious. These are Serpent Men, not Lizard Men. The reason for that is that snakes are one of our oldest evolutionary predators, warring with us in the trees for living space during our chimpanzee phase, and are most likely the reason we developed sharp eyesight to survive encounters with these creatures through tool manipulation and taking away its greatest strength, camouflage. From the beginning, the ethos of the Serpent Men was always going to be something in rivalry and antagonism to man that would use trickery or deception as its first line of defense. That's the camouflage. It's this kind of respect for the human condition that will always make Howard's literature refreshing in an American landscape filled increasingly since his death with nothing but often baseless nuance or form over function storytelling. The other reason I mentioned the literary inspiration of the Serpent Men is that naming conventions for them can be considered the other half of what good names for human characters would be. In this universe, just as the names of great men would one day be fused into the worship of gods, creating Skyfather archetype figures such as Zeus, Ra, and Odin, there is literally a Serpent Man mini-boss named Apep the Chaos Forged. Literally the name of the Chaos Serpent that does battle with Ra in Egyptian mythology. Meaning that as long as it's a Chaos Serpent, you can actually not go wrong with that name. Jormungandr is an example we'll use later in the video. This naming convention, along with Skelos the Degenerate, can show us that the naming conventions appropriate for Serpent Man would be those relating to lesser or greater dragon to serpent figures in mythology, followed by a title earned in reference to their reputation. A young Serpent Man may be hatched from an egg into the world, only to be named Jormungandr, then later to gain the name Jormungandr the Seller because he is a great merchant or haggler among his people. As a final note, though we've already touched on it, let's dive just a little bit deeper into Serpent Man physiology. While not truly cold-blooded, their partial demonic heritage enables them to not just withstand extreme heat, but also gain comfort from it, as mentioned earlier. Judging from the size differences in individual Serpent Men in the Exiled Lands, correlated with the nest of Serpent Men eggs of different sizes which can be observed in Isle of Sipta, we can assume that there are 3 different breeds of serpent men in addition to skin color differences, though skin color, more specifically albinism, seems to play a larger role in social standing. The first breed is what could be called man-sized, being anywhere between 5 feet to 6 feet tall. The next are a bit more muscular and fairly taller. They also seem to have reduced intelligence due to the lack of clothes worn, which will be our signifier for that, standing at about 7 to 8 feet tall. We'll call these Neanderthal-sized. Any larger, and we'll call them giant-sized. That ends our entry in our chronicling of the non-human races. This really is just meant to be a introductory video. The non-human races and culture of Conan. Come back next time for our analysis and theory crafting on the Giant Kings. I leave you with this taste of Serpent Man language from Conan Exiles.